they've really developed pretty robust outdoor restaurants, and they're on the existing street. And that
Really?
hasn't happened in Chicago, almost not at all. And I think part of it is that the city, New York, made it easy for the restaurateurs to take over these
Mm,
spaces.
mm-hmm.
And I think the second thing, oh, like I went to one last night on the Upper East Side. They had heaters, the whole thing. It was like, it was very, very cool, even though it was only as wide as a parking stall. But I think the other thing is that the climate of New York is probably just sufficiently not as cold as Chicago that you could do that. So it
Well,
was really interesting.
well, I confessed to you earlier that I have not been to New York, Carol, and
You need to go.
I do need to go. And it has been, the suspense has been just collecting that I won't know what to do with myself once I go there. So I'll do baby steps. I have to go multiple times. That's
Oh,
definitely.
you're gonna have to go. Yeah. I mean, there's so much. I mean, it's a fascinating city. I mean, you talk to any New Yorker and probably a lot of other people, and they tell you it's the center of the world, and it
Mm,
may very well be. I don't
uh-huh.
know, but there's always I find enough similarity between Chicago and New York that I'm always learning something about my home city.
Mhm.
Yesterday we looked at there's a new park that was donated by a private party called Little Island Park, and
Okay.
it's really interesting. It's in the Hudson River, and it's on one of the old piers on the whole west side of New York. That used to be where the ocean liners would come in. This particular pier was owned by the White Star, the Cunard line. So it was, the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth came in there. And the piers have been gone for a long time though, because the transatlantic crossings have been gone for a long time. And so the architect is, oh my God, I'll remember it. But basically, they made a little island, and it's only like 2 acres, and it's intensely landscaped. It's very expensive, per square foot. But the space it made in the city was just delightful to see. So
Yeah, those little pockets are really nice, especially in big cities like New York and Chicago even. There's little gems like that around the city. But for all of you watching right now, thank you for joining Designing Healthy Environments. Good morning. I am Alicia Ponce, founder and principal of AP Monarch. We are architects and sustainability consultants. And I'm sitting here with Carol Ross Barney, design principal and founder of Ross Barney Architects. We're talking about New York because she has just gotten back from New York to receive an award, yet another award. The Cooper Hewitt National Design Awards gave her design firm an award. So congratulations again, Carol. And I am so excited to have you here today to talk about, gosh, there's so many things, but we're going to focus on the limited amount of time that we have with you today on responsive, healthy design. Welcome, Carol. Thank you so much for being here.
well, thanks for asking me to join you, Alicia. It's really fun. We in all, like revealing everything. We had a practice session, and it lasted way longer than the time period we have. So I know we're not going to run out of things to say, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you some more.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I've been watching here is this net zero project that your firm has done, and these green buildings with one of the biggest global retailers of the world, McDonald's, and how your offices approach sustainable design, responsive, healthy design. And so you have clearly done that with McDonald's, with the Chicago flagship, with Disney World, the flagship. And I have examples here to show people.
Okay. We've had an amazing relationship with McDonald's. We started working for them in 2017. So we've been working for them for 3 or 4 years now. And it's not something that I ever really thought about doing, because our work has been really concentrated in the public realm and in the design of public spaces, architecture, essentially made by the people, often by government agencies. And so when McDonald's contacted us in 2017 and asked us if we were interested in designing a new store for their flagship Chicago site, which is, if you're a Chicagoan, you know it as the site of the rock and roll McDonald's.
Yeah.
But they own a full city block at Clark, Ontario, in River North. And it's become, I mean, songs have been written about rock and roll McDonald's. So it's become quite famous in its own right. But they decided that it was time to renovate this store. And what they told us that they wanted, interestingly enough, they didn't come and say, oh, you have to do X, Y, Z. They told us that they wanted a building that complemented its site and the people who live around it, its neighbors. And so we started talking to them. The getting to know you process was really intense. And one thing that I personally did not know is one of their major corporate tenets is that they will do, it is sustainability, is resilience. And if you go to their website, you can read a lot more about it. But it's reflected mostly because they're such a big corporation. It's reflected in their supply chain. So they've been shopping for cage-free chickens and sustainable materials at a scale that few other companies do. If McDonald's says we're doing only organic potatoes, the organic potato market goes out the window, because they're such a big buyer. But they had looked at their buildings, but not as intensely as they looked at some other things. So we said two things to them. One is we want to do a store that reflects that part of your corporate personality that at least everybody might not understand by walking by the stores. And then the second thing is we were so impressed that they didn't want to build a high rise on this site, that they wanted to be a good neighbor. And so those were the two sort of driving thoughts starting the design. And out of that came, well, let's make this the most sustainable, the most resilient McDonald's that we possibly can. And it received a platinum certification from the USGBC last year. So, I mean, it's quite an accomplishment for McDonald's, because I'm supposed to say quick service. Fast food is not the word that they use. I mean, quick service restaurants use a lot of energy because it's basically a very small building that does a whole lot of cooking. So, I mean, by its nature, it's an intense energy user. So that was the start of our relationship with McDonald's.
Mm-hmm. And so what I found interesting too when we were talking is that you really looked at it, you looked at their corporate goals and found that they align very much with yours.
Yeah, we have a principle, not a principle, one of our goals in our office is we will do the most sustainable building for a client that we can. And we don't ask their permission. If they hire us, they're going to get the most sustainable building that they can afford. It's not negotiable.
Because that's the whole thing. We can, and I love what you say, it's not negotiable. We have the knowledge, the skill, and the resources. So why aren't we doing this more often?
Oh, you're absolutely right. There is no reason at all. That's why And so far we haven't lost any clients by telling them that it's not negotiable. We've had some that say, well, as long as you don't spend more money, or fine. In fact, but what's happening more recently, especially since projects like McDonald's get more notoriety, is we're finding the clients ask us for that type of design. They're interested.
Mhm.
I'm really encouraged, particularly by especially this year, sort of the turnaround in attitude. I'm not sure we have enough time to save our species, but
Uh-oh.
I think our attitude is getting a whole lot better.
Yeah, yeah, this sense of urgency is definitely it's a lot more present. And can you talk about some of the opportunities that you found working on this project? Like what can, architects have, I feel, a responsibility to be able to do something like this. So what are the opportunities that you found along the way?
Well, for the Chicago flagship in particular,
Mhm.
we found that this site was fast, that if you look at that part of Chicago, um, it's changing. It's changing from a mostly, it was warehouse and office, and automobile oriented area to residential and pedestrian oriented. And Chicago and the store is now. And so we were able to convince McDonald's in the city that we could do considerably reduced parking on this site. And the bonus then is you can turn now the area that's not being parked. I think if you keep going, there's another drawing.
Okay.
Just go keep flipping. This is a store, like I said, at Clark in Ontario. Um, and oh, if you didn't know what we replaced, you can see in this little slide, but the original rock and roll McDonald's. By the way, the reason it was the rock and roll McDonald's is this is it's a franchisee owned restaurant. It's not owned by the company. And this particular franchisee had a collection of rock memorabilia, and he put it in his store, and they became very well known for it. So that's why it's called Rock and Roll. And but it's always been a high volume, important store for McDonald's. And so then you can see the 50th anniversary edition of McDonald's, where they kind of, in 2005, they supersized everything. So
Let's
yeah,
exercise.
so yeah, but keep going, because there's a really interesting slide coming up, I think.
If my system will allow me to keep forwarding. It wants to. Oh, here we go.
It wants to oh.
Is
Oh,
this?
so basically this drawing shows that line that I was talking about, pedestrian to vehicular. The store is located on the two arterials that come off at Kennedy. So, I mean, it does have a huge automobile, when you're in an automobile profile. But the other thing that's kind of nice, they call this their flagship, and it's really pretty close. It's like within a 10-minute walk to almost any other flagship store. If we
Mhm.
ever get retail going again on Michigan Avenue, and it looks like there are a lot of people who are outing there now, they're walking around. Oh, this is what I wanted to show you, because here's this area. The yellow is our site, our full block site. And what we were doing here is we were inventorying the amount of green space that this becoming residential community actually had access to. Then you can see that there isn't much at all.
Right.
So by reducing the parking, we could turn McDonald's not into a public park, but a neighborhood green space. By the way, we did talk about turning it into a public park. The land transfer and everything's way too complicated right now. But we thought, well, you can make it a usable green space in any case.
So those are the way that you come up to, a solution like this, right? Just.
Mhm. So the upper diagram here, that's
Mhm.
how much parking we had. You can see that basically it was a building and a parking lot. And what we built is a building with a parking lot on a site that's landscaped and available to the community as green space.
Mhm.
So that was a big piece for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that lends itself to what we're talking about here is the responsive, healthy design. It's like you approach this area and it just feels a bit more softer, more welcoming with the green space and even with the permeable pavers. It just adds a sense of like that texture alone, the color. It's to me, it's healthier.
Oh, and the trees this year have come in so well. It's, I mean, I'm pretty impressed at how green the site appears as you drive up to it.
Mhm.
Um, we have, I think we put on over 10,000 plants on the site.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
and almost all of it is xeriscape. The whole site is permeable paving. In fact, we offered to even pave the sidewalks in a permeable paving and handle the stormwater for the city. They declined. They wanted us to still leave the sidewalks. We replaced them in non-permeable and they returned to the city gutters. I would have liked to do the whole site. I think it would have been really amazing. But, oh,
Yeah.
this gives you a good view of on the site today. And McDonald's has invested in outdoor seating. The franchisee, who's son of the original um, owner, it's become a family franchise. In fact, he's in business with his mother, which I love. I think that everybody should be in business with their mother. Anyway, he also has a rock band. So that little platform that we built, he keeps on threatening to have a concert where he will play. I'm waiting. But this gives you an idea of the permeable paving that we used. The other thing that's kind of interesting is this corner, Clark and Ontario. We are testing here the idea of a shared street, a shared plaza, because we still have traffic picking up drive-through food. But we wanted to make it friendlier to pedestrians, so it felt like it was part of the sidewalk. And so far, it's been scrutinized more after COVID is can we share? What's the purpose of our city streets? What sort of spaces can cars and people share?
Yeah, and so the photovoltaic array, you said, how much energy does it provide?
Okay, we have our latest numbers on it show that we're providing between 60 and 65% of the energy that the store uses, which we thought we'd be close to that. We were a little surprised when we laid it out that we'd get that close in Chicago. We weren't sure how efficient we would be. The background to those are really, it's really quite interesting. Um, we started considering sort of the big um, shade structure when we decided we were going to make a park, because then it seemed really important to um, to create some shade in the city, especially our summers get so hot. The other thing is, even though we thought it was wonderful that we were only putting a little hamburger stand on the site in the densest part of the city, or one of the densest part of the cities, we want we wanted the site, we wanted our improvements to hold their place on the street. We wanted them to, play a part in the streetscape. So basically, by creating this facade height um, shade structure, we answered those two things. After we did that, we said, well, what if we put solar panels up there for, we had dabbled, but we never had a client who had enough capital. We tend to work for really practical governmental type things to actually go out and buy renewable energy on site.
Mhm.
And as designers, while I mean, we're big proponents of it, that I don't think that that's the biggest piece of a designer's responsibility. I think your biggest responsibility is to make that building as efficient as possible, because quite honestly, the renewables you can add. Um,
Yeah.
or you can provide them by buying them. And so I don't think that every site in the US will have, PVs on it when we're through. But this one was really interesting because we did shade, we held the facade line, and we provided enough energy. Another byproduct that we discovered when we started doing our energy modeling, but we weren't aware of it when we started doing the design, is it actually goes over the top of the building, and the shade it provides the building brings down the cooling load drastically,
Mm.
which I never really thought about making an umbrella over a building. But I don't mean, I'm not sure that if you looked at it in terms of payback on investment, that it would work
Mhm.
in a favorable way. But it does, it was surprising when our numbers came back.
Mm.
So we're doing about 65%. It shocks people that you can do that in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely wonderful. It just creates all of these benefits, right? Because when you, I'm telling you, if you haven't walked by this project, you have to just to feel how different this project feels with, you know, if you cross the street, you know, just across the street, very different feels, right? The shade it provides. And you get to see you know, the permeable pavers. It's you learn from the building, and that was another thing that you said, is that education was key, because you know customers come in and come out, and so what are they going to experience when they're in the building or when they're driving through the building? What is that visitor experience in responsive healthy design?
Well, for me, I, I totally agree with what you just said, Alicia. I want people to feel the building. I think we've been saying in our practice for a long time that design is a right, not a privilege. But I think some other people have been more eloquent than me at talking about spatial justice and space equity. And I think that even though, you know, you may not be able to put your finger on why this feels better, what makes you feel healthier, um, you know it. And it's important, and it's important to your quality of life. So we're really, really glad that McDonald's invested in that and that you can feel it. Also, if you go inside, they actually have a little, this was our first attempt at education, and it's not lame, but it was, you know, it wasn't part of our major part of our design. In the Orlando store, we have a major interpretive effort, but they do tell you when you go inside what the pieces of the design do, what various building components are responsible for, that type of thing. And the other thing that's really nice that we have talked about with McDonald's is this this store is, I mean, this is a first example, but they also used it to educate their franchisees about what's possible. And no, not all of them can build a store like this, but we found out that our biggest energy savings are really in the operations. We found out, for example, that um, we could save a lot of money and a lot of energy by using better seals on the coolers, and that the standby, by adding a standby cycle for some of the cooking equipment, made a real dent in energy usage. And so there's a lot of things to learn from this building, from both from little details about operating it, actually cooking the hamburgers, to what it can do for customers and for people, for neighbors.
Wow, that's fascinating. And so that's where innovation comes in. You just tweak it a little bit and see what happens. You know, you just might find, you know, efficiency there, chances are. And and so then I'd like to then take the conversation to the McDonald's building in Disney World, because you're dealing with different climates, yet here we are again, you know, designing now for a net zero, right? And so what could you take what you learned from Chicago and then, okay, this doesn't work in Florida.
Oh, okay. So this is a really good part of the story. I think it's one of the things that we as a profession need to do, and that we as communities need to do. So, I mean, my design firm suggested that we make this the most sustainable McDonald's, the one in Chicago. Okay. And they went along with it. They thought it was a great idea, but it wasn't part of our original brief, you know, make this the most, don't, it was not in the brief to make it a platinum building. Okay. But about, oh man, it was less than 6 months after we opened the Chicago store. They came back. By the way, my client there, the really good guys, a bunch of architects. Um, Mike Seffrin, Max Carmona, and they've been absolutely amazing clients. They listen and they go fight for the ideas. Anyway, they came back and they said, okay, we want to do another flagship store, but this one has to be net zero, or we want it to be net zero. So they thought of that. So, I mean, the lesson to me, it's not build it and they will come, but it's kind of like that. I mean, what was not at the very front of their design criteria became make this net zero. And so we started. Now, Orlando is hugely different than Chicago. I mean, Chicago's in a neighborhood, it's in a climate where it snows and hot and cold. It has it's in the middle of a big kind of carbon-filled city, especially there where you're getting off the Kennedy. The site in Orlando it's on the Disney World campus. So it's this big, gigantic landscape master development. And the people who eat there are people who are visiting Disney World. So they're not neighbors, they're visitors. And in Florida, you couldn't think of a climate that's farther away from Illinois, I don't think. It's like totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think maybe at first we were like, oh, there's nothing the same about this, but there is. And I can tell you that we started with the operations, the idea that we had to do the most efficient building before trying to add renewables and making it net zero. So there was a restaurant on the Orlando site before we started, on the Disney site before we started, and it was using about 1 million kilowatt hours a year. So our first instinct, our first impression was we have to figure out how to reduce that. And in the end, we did reduce it about 30%. So it's using only 70% of the energy it did before, which is a big chunk. And what's interesting about that, just to give you an idea about renewable, I never had the opportunity to really finish a building that was completely making its own energy. If we had not designed down or improved the performance of the building, we didn't have a site big enough to mount the panels for the energy, to provide the energy. By the way, we did look at other energy sources, wind and geothermal, but we would have had to rent additional space from Disney for our PVs.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's this crucial step that you have to take. And right now we're doing a high school. We're renovating Regina Dominican High School in Wilmette. And again, in this case, both the administration and the order that originally founded the school, the Adrians of the Dominicans of Adrian, Michigan, they're super conscious about the role that their building plays in protecting the planet. And it's working with the girls. They wanted to put solar panels on the building so badly, but we had to go through the discussion that you have to make a good building before you go to renewables. So.
And in Florida, well, I mean, any climate, you can also look at passive strategies. And I think in Florida, you definitely have that opportunity to provide an extra layer of comfort, right? With respect to opening up, for natural ventilation and shade, right? And so that, strategies like that reduce energy consumption when you start to push the envelope in that direction.
Yeah, one of the explorations that Disney does, the Chicago not so much, is we really became interested in the human perception of comfort. And I think maybe because we're not Floridians, we're like, oh wow, this is different. We better see what it means. We found that in Florida, if you don't shade your building, and if you're out in the sun, it's uncomfortable a large percentage of the time. I can't remember the exact number, but it's probably around 80%.
Mm.
But we found that if we ventilated and if we shaded, we could reduce the amount of time that that the natural conditions are uncomfortable to about I think we brought it down to 35 or 40%, which means that operate this building without heat or air conditioning if we took advantage of the Florida climate. So we started trying to design a building that would adjust, that would create those conditions of shade and ventilation. And in the end, the building has a jalousie wall that responds to directions from its automation system.
Mhm.
And when we hit certain preset humidity and temperature points, the building opens up. It literally breathes.
Mm.
Um, and
Lungs.
and it saves energy by doing that. You know, it's interesting because it's still cooking still takes more energy than cooling people, but in it then you have a story that's happening while the people are there, and they have to consider not only sustainability and how much energy they're using, but what comfort is, what makes them comfortable, which gets back to the topic we're talking about today. What's healthy?
Right. Right. And I mean, you started off by saying that McDonald's was one of their corporate goals is to be resilient, right? And so to me, that's also designing within your footprint and how far just you can go in that footprint, right? Because
Exactly.
I mean, we've been talking about carbon, carbon emissions and operational performance in systems. But now we feel that we can really go ahead if we start to understand embodied carbon energy too. What's
Yeah.
your take on that?
On that one, I think, architects haven't been as keyed into the idea. Well, it's not just using energy; it's making materials and putting them in place.
Mhm.
So, it's not just the operation of your building. Because for a long time, I think that's really what we thought about, or it was easier to think about that, or maybe there's more low hanging fruit there.
Mhm.
Um, but it's become more and more apparent that, yeah, buildings use a lot of energy, but it's not just in the operation, it's in their creation. And so McDonald's has been really open to those ideas. In Chicago, for example, there's a couple firsts there. It was one of the first buildings to use carbon cure
Mm.
technology, which is actually using carbon dioxide to make concrete, and also replacing Portland cement with
Mhm.
other materials. Which both those things, Portland cement takes a tremendous amount of energy to make, and therefore it has a lot of embodied carbon. And um, so using some other material does it. And then the carbon cures is a patented technology, but they also use carbon dioxide in the concrete mix. Anyway, so that's one of the first uses in Chicago. Ozinga, by the way, is selling it, and I have to really commend them for doing that. We
Yeah.
worked really closely with them to put that in place. The other thing that's kind of nice about Chicago is it is at the point it was built, and I expect this will change really fast. It was one of the first uses of cross-laminated timber
Mhm.
in Chicago, and we work closely with the city to do the right things. I mean, the city, Chicago's not unique, but we do have our own building code rather than tying
Right.
into any of the national building codes. So it's a little bit of a negotiation to try anything new in Chicago.
Yes.
Um, so, but if you go into that McDonald's and you look up, all the structural deck is CLT. And
Mm.
I mean, I know architects know what CLT is, but if there's anyone listening who's not an architect, CLT essentially is a very strong structural deck made out of wood. So you avoid a lot of the manufacturing carbon that you get for steel. And of course, for concrete, we've already talked about that. And it works. The way I explain it to people, it's like plywood on steroids. Instead of making plywood strong because you run one ply one way and one the other way. So it becomes strong in two directions because wood will be only strong in one direction. And so what CLT is, instead of using veneer, you use 2x4s to make what turns out to be like a sheet of plywood that's a foot thick. So it can be really strong, and it just by its nature reduces the amount of carbon it takes to manufacture,
Yeah, I'm
or
glad
carbon
you brought up.
emissions that it takes to manufacture it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up carbon cure because I actually was listening in on how they strip the carbon dioxide and just it was fascinating to
Yeah.
see. If you haven't seen it, this is just nerding out here. It's fascinating to see how they strip the carbon and then put it back into the concrete mix. It's just like I need to rewatch it again, and I'm like, how
Yeah.
the technology that is happening right now, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I have to keep reminding myself, and the other designers in my office also keep reminding me, is that um, the materials that we use aren't inherently evil. What needs to change is the technology for some of them so we can use them successfully. So, yeah. So, concrete, who knows? It may have a wonderful future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's just the way that we make things. And I know that even if we look at water, the way we, our plumbing fixtures, right? It's just,
Yeah.
we're not taking away water, or we're just doing it differently. It's a different technology, from lowering the gallons per flush. And if we want to compost, right? It's just a different way of doing it.
I think, yeah, my thought about it is always that the best designs optimize, and um, yeah, they, they, they make things work together.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I would like to give I think we should mention that, or I will mention that both Carol and I, we went to U of I. So I want to give a special shout out to U of I here. And it means a lot because, you are one of the pioneers that have been in this business are you celebrating 40 years now, or have you?
We already did. It
You
was last
did.
year. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. 40 years. Uh, yeah, we've been in practice for 40 years. I've been an architect for way longer than that. It's kind of scary when you think about it. If anyone who's listening is thinking about being an architect, do it. It's the most fascinating career you could possibly want. I can't even think of not doing it. That's
Yeah.
how much I love my work. I can't conceive of not being not trying to solve these problems and not being challenged by them. So yeah, but yes, we are both graduates of an excellent architecture school, one of the oldest in the country,
Mhm.
um, and one of the most distinguished. It has changed. In my freshman class was over 300. It
Okay.
was the 5-year program, and I I guess I really didn't think about it. I had a wonderful guidance counselor in high school who didn't tell me that architecture was not a woman's career. She said, "Oh, you want to be an architect? Go ahead." So when I got there were 12 women in my class of 300.
Oh,
Yeah, so it was pretty stunning. Um, and we graduated 100. I mean, because a lot of people decide they don't want to be architects on the way,
yeah.
and there were 3 women in my class.
Wow. Yeah.
So but it changed rapidly after that. And I think, for a woman, it is a good career. I think that there are barriers in architecture but they're pretty much equivalent to the ones you find in our society in general, which
Mhm.
is not, I mean, I guess I'm giving it sort of a half blessing.
I understand, but even though as a woman who also owns her own business, it's just I have to, applaud you for being that one of those pioneers, because I honestly I love architecture, and that's all I ever wanted to do. But to start a firm was a shocker for me. And so women like you and many other women, U of I grads too, um, have really, set paved the way for the rest of us. And it's not easy, but it is rewarding. So it's a great profession to be in.
It's really interesting because there has been this succession of women architects who
Yes.
went to Illinois, and one of my good friends and mentor was Gertrude Kurbis, who
Mm,
also attended the University of Illinois. And I remember she Gert was really blunt a lot of the time, and I remember one time she saying to me, "Carol, you think this is so easy? You just open a firm like that. You don't know how hard it's been." And I looked at her kind of like, oh, man, you're right. I haven't thought about that. And I now know that she's right. And what each woman architect needs to do is just bump the ceiling a little higher, make a few more cracks. So yes, I had it easier than Gertrude. I hope, Alicia, and I think you're starting a really marvelous practice. Actually, starting you're into it.
yeah.
Um, that you know that my cracks will help you,
Mm.
and that you'll make some more for the next people. But there's been really amazing architects besides Gertrude. Um, uh, Pat Natke,
Yes.
Urban Works is a U of I graduate. Dina Griffin
Mhm.
from IDEA is a U of I graduate, and Jeannie Gang is a U of I graduate. And those are the old people. And then there's your class and the stars of that class. So I think it's just really a great future and an amazing historic past.
Yes, and we have a great responsibility in front of us, I think. And, projects like the ones that you're creating, the ones that I'm working on, to create a better future, at least, as a mom of two young children, I take it very seriously. And for that, like, we need to take bold risks, make bold decisions, not just us, but work with our policymakers, right? Legislation and others in the building industry to make this happen, because just like you showed us with McDonald's, we can do it. It's possible.
That's why I keep on doing it.
Well, thank you so much, Carol. This was absolutely wonderful, and we will continue following your work. And congratulations again on your award. that
Oh,
you
thank you. Thank
accepted.
you so much. And this was a really great conversation. Um,
I
I'm
enjoyed
going to
it.
follow. I'm going to follow all of them from now on.
Yes, yes, we have great conversations coming up. All right, have a
Okay.
wonderful
Well, thank you.
bye.